Hi, Susie Murphy here, Executive Director of the San Diego Mountain Biking Association. We are here to present to you part two of our discussion about Black Mountain Trail development. We did part one a week ago or so. It's posted on our YouTube SDMBA channel. So if you missed that one, you can go back and check that out. And today I'm here again with Matt Bartelt, who's the Vice President of our Board of Directors and also our liaison to Black Mountain Open Space Park, working with the City of San Diego there. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, Susie. Good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. So we're going to talk about moving on from the beginnings of trail planning and building at Black Mountain Open Space Park, kind of into the middle of the story. In the last episode, we talked about Awi Trail and Lilac Trail over on the north side of the mountain. And today we're going to talk about what happened when further trail plans were implemented up higher on the mountain and how that came to be and how it all fits together. So Matt, after Awi and Lilac Trails were completed, what came next?
On the master plan, it had called for trails over on the East Ridge, but in order to get there, we actually had to build a couple connectors from what was the NighHawk Trail over to the East Ridge. So we worked on that. The first part of the connector was on the west side of the ravine there, and the rangers had actually started working on that at the same time we were working on a Lilac Trail. If you're looking at that map there, what we started working on was the green trail. Right where it says Nighthawk was the start, and we took part of an existing trail and then connected it down to the saddle where the repair station is. So it was crazy though, because it was approached from two different directions, a high and a low line, and they met in the middle, but unfortunately the alignment was off significantly. So we had to recut the alignment 3 different times to get the slope that's there. Originally, it was a near vertical fall line, and we knew that wasn't going to work.
Awesome. And then how does that work? Like you mentioned, there was a little struggle in getting the alignment just quite right. How do you decide on the final trail alignments? Like what goes into that?
I don't care how much planning you do, you wind up making it up as you go along when you're out in the field. Originally, there was the master plan, and that really did dictate where the trail was going to go. But within that alignment, it really was a 50-foot corridor that we had to play with. And that was great, but you really had to be careful, because if you went 10 or 15 feet one way or the other, because of the topography and the side slope, you could easily have a 20 to 30-foot difference, probably as much as 60 in a couple spots where your elevations were way off. So lots of mapping went through this. We worked really hard to make sure it was, but it really was interpretation on the day of the cut to really get it to align itself.
And when you're doing that kind of work, what methods or tools or things do you use to create the alignments before you really start getting into building the trail? What goes into that, or what tools do you
Uh,
use?
well, the first thing that I would use and always been really, really comfortable is going to be Google Earth. What's nice about that is it has a topography tool, and you can come up with a rough slope to really get it down to the foot of what your alignment's going to be. Understanding there is still some adjustment in there as you go along. So we would download that to a GPS, and then we go marching through the brush. We would be using the flagging tape, handheld GPS. It was line of sight, and the brush initially was so heavy in spots, it was crazy. You couldn't see more than 4 feet ahead of you. We would wind up smashing through brush, because we would go in to not cut the corridor, but to flag the corridor. And so you would smash through brush, go 4 or 5 feet, hang a flag, smash through some more brush, another 4 or 5 feet, and it repeat as necessary. And we found in a couple sections, they were less than a quarter mile, and it took us more than 3 hours. We, used a GPS to make sure that everything was there, but probably the biggest impromptu tool that we found was we went to Home Depot, bought 2 sections of 3/4 inch plumbing, And we used that, ABS pipe, hooked some bags to the end to create flags so that we could approach it from two different directions. And that helped a lot because it sped the process up. But even that took a lot of work and was difficult to see each other, even the closest. So many times it was by voice relay that we just hollered at each other to say, "Where are you? Right, left, up, down?" And ultimately we'd meet up in a section and then make a final decision if that was the acceptable alignment or not.
Yeah, for those of you that have ridden at Black Mountain and you look to either side and see uh, how thick the brush is, especially on that kind of the north easternly side of the mountain, it's dense. It's really dense. So the work just to get these alignments and flagging is a lot of hard work. And Matt, how once those alignments were flagged, how did the trails up there on the higher part of the mountain get cut?
I'd love to say I did every bit of it, but we were incredibly fortunate that the city had a budget at the time. So they hired ACE. It's a trail crew that came out and they followed the flagging and they were instructed to give us a 5-foot corridor. So they went through and brushed it and then removed the brush. They didn't pull the stumps or anything like that. So that became more of us. But once that corridor was cut, you had your alignment and then you could really get down to the trail itself. So initially you'd go out as a large group and just kind of work. What we found worked really well was to break into specialized groups where you would send a group of 3 to 4 people out ahead and their job literally was stump removal. All they did was go pull stumps out of the ground that were cut so that you had a clean shred to work with. Then you would bring a group through that would be tread clearing, so moving any deadfall, breaking up the ground, starting to level the tread. You'd have a second group that would come through, do the raking and final finishing work of the tread. And then a fourth group after that would actually do the ultimate finishing, which would be the additional brushing, removing of things. And by moving through those groups, you could take a group of 30 people, break them up, and it really became this manageable team. And it worked really, really well. As a matter of fact, we were impressed because it took less time than we anticipated to do. It was less than 2 years to get those sections done. What we would do in the early days, we would hike in, we'd meet over at the Sun Devil Way Park trailhead and hike in with the tools. But ultimately, probably the greatest saving grace was having the rangers there and working with us because they were willing on any days possible to drive the tools both up and down the mountain. And the initial hike from the Sun Devil Way to just even the start of the work point was over 3/4 mile uphill the entire way. And even when you got there, remember that was the start point. The trail went another half mile to 3/4 miles further north than where that was. So you had a lot of really tired people. What was truly amazing for all of this for me was we were able to generate people to come out in groups of 25 or more almost every single weekend that year from January until early May. And we met out there with regularity. And we were living on the mountain there every Saturday, and it happened. What was the last little piece? The crowning was the last day of Manzanita, was in the middle of the second year. And that was the part like we just finished this and we finished it probably 6 weeks sooner than we thought it would happen. And so just sitting back now and realizing what was done on that trail, that by far has been my most fun trail build for me and also the most memorable. So you just think about everything that happened and what we did to get it done. So we had groups, people come out there, and it's been very popular ever since.
And I think I recall a couple of days the Rangers hauling or somebody hauling the barbecue up in the back of their truck with some refreshments, if I
Yeah, we
remember
had
correctly.
one day we actually did a hamburger barbecue up there. We had Boy Scouts come out, we had groups, everything else. I mean, it wasn't just dedicated trail riders. It was the community. It was a community event, and I've really enjoyed that so far.
And I know on Manzanita, because it does have a lot of characters, a lot of rocks up there on that mountain. And wasn't there a special crew of some of our veteran trail builders who enjoy building and stabilizing like more rocky elements? They kind of worked on some sections out there as well.
Yeah, as we went along, people really did develop a taste for trail building, and you knew who could do what or enjoy doing what. There is a significant rock outcropping on one of the points on the west side of the hill that we really had to work through. And the team went in there before the tread was even there and built that out. So we would be working on some of the connectors and they'd go disappear into the brush to build out that trail. And again, you always think this is going to take longer than it did, but they were done with it in a relatively quick amount of time. And to this day, that's one of the favorite points of mine riding through there, because I would love to say I'm great enough that I ride through it and make it every single time. I'd say I'm about a 60-70% shot, and then approaching it from different ways. So they did a fantastic job on the
Yeah,
rocks.
for sure. So a special thing about Black Mountain that causes some opportunities for challenge is that there is an old arsenic mine on the mountain. So Matt, can you tell us a little bit about that and how it's affected trails and why we shouldn't lick the rocks at Black Mountain?
Yeah. So from Black Mountain heading north up through and past Lake Hodges is a seam of rock that we found actually has some of the highest naturally occurring deposits of arsenic recorded. I mean, on the magnitude of 50 to 100 times than other places. Now, this was all based on a grad student from SDSU's study. And in 2017, after this study was posted, the city found out about it. And in a real knee-jerk reaction, they decided to shut down portions of Miners Loop Trail, which is just above the arsenic mine, and then also portions of Manzanita. Ultimately, what happened, these spots, they came through. I think the reason that they got closed down was this was about the same time as the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and seeing how that didn't get handled well, I think the city went well into overdrive for this. But ultimately, what they did from that student study, they came in and identified the hot spots that were on the trail, and the decision was to close the trails. We lobbied really hard to make sure that that didn't happen, and ultimately they agreed not to close the trails. Instead, they wound up capping the ground with geotechs and gravel. So to this day, if you're riding NighHawk towards the far south end, you're going to find a large patch of gravel there. That's one of the hot spots. If you ride on Miners, there's a short section that is one of the few uphill sections on the downhill side of Miners. That is also one hot spot. And then there is a significant spot that as you climb up the connector from the bike repair station to Manzanita proper that is covered in the geotechs and gravel. That too was identified as a hotspot. So, those are there for safety, and they go in and they will periodically add gravel, but it really is there for purpose. So
And
the joke here now is we've always
yeah,
kind of said, how do you stay safe on the mountain? Don't lick the rocks. And
right.
that has been our rallying cry at all of our work parties ever since. Nobody lick rocks and we'll be okay. And that's what we stayed
Exactly.
with.
Yeah. So anyway, little known history probably for a lot of people about Black Mountain. And then in all this work, here's a great picture of one of the groups at the end of Sun Devil Way. After this looks like a after picture for sure. Rod looks pretty tired down there in the bottom right corner. That's
Yep.
awesome.
This
Um,
was our last day. This is when we had wrapped it up. It was like, we need to get a picture of this. So this is us all sitting at the Sun Devil Way trailhead after coming off the mountain. We
awesome.
were cooked.
Rich Julian's even in there with his grandson. Look at that.
Uh-huh. It was a
Anyway, that
big
was
day.
true. So, with all your years of working up there and the history of human, traffic on the mountain over years and years, what's the weirdest or the coolest thing that you found doing work up on Black Mountain?
Oh, well, Black Mountain's been around forever. So understand it's seen Jeep use, motorcycle use, and everything long before it was incorporated in the city. So there's all sorts of things up there. One of the things I've always been interested in is the history. So there's the what is it? Aerial photography, historical aerials, and it's got pictures of the mountain back from the early 20s. And there were old power lines that ran along the south slope. There was an old substation out there. When we were doing some of the work on other trails, we came across these ceramic insulators that were from the 1930s. Somebody had identified them there. It's interesting because they're there and it's all over the place. Of course, with all the off-road use, you also had a fair amount of drinking. So it's not just currently, this
What?
has been going on forever. I know, but the cans we find out there, they're in pretty good shape, but they're all the old pull top. You remember the old aluminum things you would make the pole chains out of. They're all over the mountain. So we found those. And one time I even found an old bottle of beer that was still sealed. We did not drink it. But we had to open it. It still smelled like beer, but
Ugh.
I wasn't about to taste it because I had no idea how old that was. But that had to be a 30, 40-year-old bottle of beer. Looking back in hindsight, I wish I had saved it as a memento, but I didn't think of it at the time. So yeah, you'd think you were in the spot where there's no one been there before. I think every bit of that mountain has seen use at one point or another.
Right. Well, that Schlitz can is pretty sweet, I think. Um, so what kind of, since the trail system is now kind of has a lot of different loops and a lot of different options for people, what kind of community events take place on Black Mountain?
We're seeing a lot more than there were ever there before. When we first started trail work, this was back in the days when Racers and Chasers was still doing the Black Mountain Enduro. And that was the last real race that happened out there. But after we started putting in all the trails, the first year we finished Lilac and Awi, we were able, with a little creative mapping, to include that as the one lap for everybody coming into the Black Mountain Aid Station. They weren't too happy because the approach was incredibly steep. So we're working on some other alternatives, but it's there. Now what we're doing for the archipelago is we have a half arc that starts at the Sun Devil Way trailhead and pretty much follows our original build, which would include Little Black Mountain, Manzanita, and then over and down Miners. So we have that run every year. Xterra, in or about the same time, holds their annual 50-mile and 25-mile endurance race. There is another endurance race that happens. We've seen there's a San Diego Firefighters event that happens. It's both a bike and mountain race that runs up and down the mountain. And, just seeing everything that's going on right now, knowing that gyms are closed because of the COVID-19 and other limitations, this mountain is seeing more traffic than I think we have ever seen on there before. So it's really nice to have these trails because people can get away from each other. It's really
Right.
nice we got that done.
Yep. And I didn't want to gloss over another really important thing about Black Mountain is the Joss Arnold Trail for All People, which I went back to the map here. It's kind of up on the Carmel Valley roadside, and you can access it from the Miners Ridge parking area. And it's a very short pathway made for access for people in wheelchairs or maybe people whose walking ability is limited for some reason. There's benches along the way. It has an amazing view off to the kind of the northeast. Can you talk just briefly, Matt, about how that trail came to be?
Sure. So Jazz was a member of the Black Mountain CAC, and I met him. I did not know him for a long time, but when I met him, he and Rod Simmons and Ed Christensen, the ranger there, were working on the trail. And the idea was just that, a trail for all people, no limitations. Because much of the trail on Black Mountain is quite physical and takes a lot of effort. They wanted someone to be able to experience the outdoor. So what you have is a compressed DG trail that's approximately 5 feet long, wide, excuse me. And it is the maximum grade on it is 5%. But sadly, before it was finished, Jazz did pass away. He was wheelchair bound, and he did get the opportunity to go out there and run a lap on it in its unfinished state.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, this trail is named in his memory. He did a lot. This was an amazing thing for him to get done because this is really the first of its kind in San Diego, and it was a very large deal. There's all sorts of memorials up there, and there's even things put in GIS that will recognize it for somebody who comes across that
Mhm.
area if you ever use that program.
Yeah, it's a neat little trail. If you have anybody who would like to access the outdoors that way, I think it's a really special amenity at the mountain. And then just to wrap up today, this episode, Matt, why do you spend all your spare time? Because you have a day job. We know you have a day job, but you spend so much time doing this. Why?
So if you look at the pictures, there's 3 reasons right there. My kids. Everything for me got started They were young, they didn't ride. And I discovered the tunnels in about 2005 over in the Del Mar Mesa. This is before they were legal. And I was able to take my daughter, who was then, let's see, that was 2005, that'd make her 6. So we rode down in there and did a couple laps, and we would ride in there periodically, and she did like it. It was just a really nice bonding time. You're in the shade. So if you know the story, Tunnels was ultimately shut down for a significant amount of time while the city went through planning stages. Initially, there was not supposed to be trail in there, and I would never ever try to even think to take credit for this because there's a long army of people who did this. I was involved with it and I had a good time doing it, but the frustration and the in 2000, oh gosh, it took over 10 years. So 2016 is when I think Tunnels was reestablished. I was able to take the kids back in there. Now my boys who are teenager, my daughter who's 21, so we can still ride in there. And it's what do you do that makes a change in the world that makes a positive difference? And I would love to save every trail I can. I know I can't, but every inch of trail that we get, it makes a big deal. So we go through now, and let's go back and look what happened at Black Mountain. Fast forward. Black Mountain was not a compromise for Del Mar Mesa, but it's something that happened as a result of the process that happened at Del Mar Mesa. The city was much more amenable coming up with a plan. And I have to give Senior Ranger Ed Christensen, the head ranger of Black Mountain, most of the credit. He and Rod Simmons came up with the plan that is the trails that you see there right now. And this took a lot of back and forth. So they drafted this whole plan, received it, and it would update to the Black Mountain Master Plan. And this really was the backbone that had all this created, and it helped set precedent for future trails. And so we're going through and doing that. Now, that's the easy part. But just think about this from a standpoint of, you can see this from space. All right, Google Earth, but you can see these trails exist. You know that they're going to be there for, I would love to believe an eternity, but for a very long time because they are city-owned trails. And what does it do for everybody else? Okay, I got my kids out there. They ride with me once a year if I'm lucky. But anybody can use these trails, and it's kind of funny. You'll ride along and you see people riding. There's a little bit of, they didn't say thank you, but that's not why I do this, because they don't know who I am. It's okay being anonymous. There's trail there forever, and that means a lot to me. So we were able to make that big change, and that's why I do this.
That's what it's about, forever trails. So anyway, thank you for all of that, and thanks for your time in talking about this part of the development of Black Mountain. That's all we have for today. And next time when we do part 3 of this series, we're going to talk about how the Trail Black Widow came to be, which is still waiting for its official ribbon cutting, which we hope will happen soon.
We'll get there.
Yeah. And we'll also talk about what is in the plans even beyond Black Widow, which is considerable in the area. So Black Mountain keeps on giving. So anyway, Matt, thank you very much for tonight.
No, thank you, Susie.
We hope everybody enjoys this, and you can, like I said, check out the first part of this presentation on our STIMBA YouTube page. And thanks very much, everybody, for your support, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, everybody.